Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, whatever part of the world you're currently listening to our podcast and video blog. Today's August the 14th, okay, a day before Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump is scheduled to meet in Alaska to talk about not just Ukraine, but overall Russia-US relations, okay? Um, I've been hearing in the news and basically paying attention to what is being said regarding this meeting. The world does not revolve around Ukraine. All right, folks, as much as the Western European countries and certain countries also in, uh, Central and Eastern Europe are getting all hyped up by this meeting between Trump and Russia, Mr. Putin. Okay. To me, I think they're more interested in the overall market condition of the global finance and trade industries, how to make sure that, people continue to have some sort of economic relief. All right, folks. Yes, I believe Ukraine is going to be an issue, but it's not going to be the front and center, in my opinion. Other than the overall pre-existing condition, Ukraine throughout the country's history hasn't been the wealthiest of countries, and it manifested a lot of its shortcomings, financial shortcomings and economic shortcomings after the pandemic. And so I think that's something that will be addressed in the meeting in terms of how to bring some sort of normalcy in the Central and Eastern European corridor, and um, helping those markets recuperate and recover from the stagnation that have been happening due to the war. So I don't think it's just going to be Ukraine per se that's going to be discussed. It's going to be the overall pre-existing condition, market conditions in the region. So I think that's going to be very important for us to consider, folks. Yes, it's extremely important to, you know, um, end the war, and I definitely want to support that. But I think there's going to be underlying issue which is going to be economically driven that will be discussed at that meeting. Uh, because in all reality, folks, if the Russians truly wanted to take on Ukraine and you know uh, gain access to the whole country, they would have been able to do that a long, long time ago from the very beginning. They have the manpower, they have the skills and overall capacity to take on Ukraine, you know, uh, full force, basically. And that goes for Europe as well. They have a much more uh, capabilities and know-how in terms of combat without the U.S., without NATO. Okay, folks, they can easily uh, take on Europe as a continent. Okay, folks. So I think these are the things that needs to be considered. Um, yes, it's extremely important for the war to end. Okay, there's no question about it. And the best way to end it is to make sure that people will be able to return to normalcy one way or the other. Obviously, many of the Ukrainians that were displaced will not just, roll out of bed and return to where they were 4 years ago, or even before the pandemic, because the pandemic really, precipitated this whole market, deterioration for Ukraine. Um, and which basically led into the war, which escalated back in 2021. It didn't just happen in 2022. It started back in 2021, folks. So with that said, I think the overall subject of tomorrow's meeting will be um, how to return the region back to normalcy and basically demystify all these, you know, uh, Western European countries' attitude as far as the Russian ambition to take on the whole continent of Europe. There is no reason for them to engage in a war with Europe, let alone with just one country. They didn't even want to really, engage Ukraine to begin with. It's just that they kind of got enforced into it because many of the referendum states back in 2014 that sided with the Russians, during the referendum that voted to become Russians, were being, harassed basically by, various sectors that are, identifying themselves as a part of the Ukrainian government system under the Zelensky regime. So it didn't just start, the war didn't just happen in 2022. It started back in 2021 when a lot of the disruptions started happening in those, territories that sided with the Russians. And therefore, the Russians, based off of what they had promised to those referendum states, that they will protect them because they're territories and that they will do their best to make sure that their interests are protected. So to me, they could have easily had another referendum if Zelensky really wanted to take on the Russians and take back those referendum states. They could easily had another referendum and have them decide which sides they want to be with. Okay, folks, but that's neither near nor there now. That's the war's been an ongoing situation in the last 2 years or 4 years, I guess, in 2021. But I think what was going to be talked about is how is Trump going to be able to broker a deal? Okay, and Mr. Trump is, yes, he is a deal maker, but he isn't a foreign policy broker. Okay, you guys need to understand this. Yes, he has some business savvy. He has quite a bit of experience working with foreigners abroad to do business, but not to the point that it will satisfy the geopolitical conditions of those markets. Okay, folks. So I think he's going to basically use his, deal making acumen to try to influence the Russians to basically, just return the region back to normalcy. May it be just keeping those referendum territories that sided with them, or the escalating the war altogether, and returning the region back to normalcy, as I mentioned. So it's going to be a pretty interesting tug of war that will happen tomorrow, but it's not going to be the tug of war that, one side will dominate this conversation. It's going to be a situation where Mr. Trump will find an avenue to try to influence the decision-making process of Mr. Putin, given that majority of the bargaining chips is in Mr. Putin's favor. Okay, folks. So yeah, that's the reality of things. And I've been listening in the news as far as, Mr. Zelensky meeting with, Western European leaders that have been in his side for, I guess throughout this war. And you know what? I kind of understand why they're taking his side, but I don't understand why they don't want peace. They don't want to de-escalate the situation. Okay, folks. So that's something that I still have yet to, fully understand and wrap my brains around, because you would think that they would want to return the region back to normalcy and, bring everybody back to the table, diplomatic table, and, basically protect our markets, because the markets are the ones that will basically suffer big time if there is no economic relief in the region, when there is no, substantial business and trade commerce activities in Europe, which kind of stagnated because of the war. So that's my 10 cents regarding the meeting that will take place tomorrow. I'm gauging it from, basically the peanut gallery. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of direct connection that I have regarding the decision-making process between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, but based off of my background in Central and Eastern Europe, in emerging and frontier markets of Central and Eastern Europe, and having to pay attention to what's going on within the markets of those regions and the political activities on those regions, to the point that, give and take, political agenda will have to be evaluated. And I think majority of Europeans, these are citizens, not the decision makers, not the politicians of Europe, but a vast majority of Europeans want the war to end, and a vast majority of them are basically not 100% satisfied with the narrative that the Russians would like to take on the whole continent of Europe. If that were to be the case, the Russians again have had ample, opportunities to take on Europe. Okay, yes, they didn't want to have to deal with NATO, but that aside, if there was no NATO, and if they did want to take on Europe, they had, quite a bit of power and authority and efficiency to do that, which is not really in their best interest, even if there is a NATO or there isn't a NATO organization, folks. Just because there is no need for them to destabilize the markets that they do business with. They've been doing business in Europe forever. And on top of that, they're building up various, capabilities throughout the European market to service the markets of Europe. Okay, folks. So they weren't interested in disabling Europe. It's gotten to the point that the Russians have been, basically pushed against the wall, and they've been ganged up by many of the Western European countries, thinking that they were trying to, basically take on Europe, take on the whole continent, which wasn't even the case. And I'm not telling you anything new. If you guys pay attention to world news, not just Western news, but world news, there really isn't a reason for the Russians to get into a war conflict with anybody. And I think that's going to be the case tomorrow. They're going to tell the Trump administration that they weren't the one that pulled the trigger, that they weren't the one that wanted to escalate the war. And basically, I believe Trump is going to maneuver the deal making in the sides of, or favoring at least, the sides of peace and stability back in Central and Eastern Europe, which everybody's, in my opinion, will welcome, outside of Europe and inside the European continent. Okay, folks. So this is where everything stands. Sometimes when people read the news and listen to the news, they don't realize that the news is an industry. And the way people make money out of the news is if they hyped it up. If they try to spin the news to the point that it would attract eyeballs, it would bring in some sort of revenue to these, news organizations. They're not subject matter experts on anything. They try to spin things around, but they're not subject matter experts on anything, not in these kinds of situations in market development or geopolitics or geoeconomics. They're not experts in any of them. It's just that they need to find a way to spin things around, and now they're doing it. And they're saying, it'd be in the best interest of Ukraine to be influenced by Western European politicians that have never served in the military. They're mostly interested in building up their name brand, which is name recognition as a politician. That's extremely important if you're a politician, and therefore they're piggybacking off of the war. So the more that these politicians show, some sort of, support to Ukraine, and their name is, plastered all over the news saying that they're supporting Ukraine, the more, political assets they gain. But in all reality, folks, these politicians are simply not qualified to, engage in any war conflict with anyone, nor to develop policy that they have never had previous experience in. None of Steimer, none of Macron, or anybody, Merckx, have had experience in Central and Eastern European affairs up until the war started. So they don't know anything about the conflict, really, in terms of the situation and pre-existing condition in Central and Eastern Europe. If these were Eastern European governments, okay, trying to influence Ukraine, which now they're starting to, based off of the, mostly demand of the European Union. They're telling Eastern and Central European countries to support Ukraine, regardless of their overall predisposition. So that in itself is another topic. Okay, I'm not going to dive into Central and Eastern European affairs in terms of the political and geopolitical situation in various countries, because everybody knows that the Western European EU powerful countries are the ones that are calling the shots, and now they're up against a wall that is a Republican Party wall, a Trump wall that does not buy into, the narrative that the Russians want to take on the whole continent of Ukraine. I mean, the continent of Europe. And so that's the pure unadulterated fact. And I think eventually this war is going to subside. It's going to come to an end within the next couple of months, so that the region will return to normalcy, the markets will return to normalcy, people can, breathe as a sigh of relief and refreshments, because in all reality, no one really wants to get into a war conflict with anybody nowadays. I mean, there's this saber rattling, there's, these muscle flexing that happens, but in all reality, no one really wants to get into a war conflict with any other countries. May it be smaller countries, medium-sized countries, or giants. So that's the reality of today's world, today's new world marketplace, folks. They're more interested in building their overall market capacity, providing for their citizens, creating jobs, and influencing other countries via economic development, trade, and commercial development. That's been what I have been exposed to throughout my career, the last, over 26 years now, which doesn't really feel like it, but it's been that long. So I think that's the new idea, and the new concept is capacity building and economic development, more than war and destabilization of markets. It doesn't do anyone any good to destabilize the market of any country, neighboring country, or far distance countries. It just doesn't make sense to do that. So with that said, folks, I think the overall condition between Putin and Mr. Trump tomorrow will be very, very friendly. It's going to be positive. It's going to be, let's find a solution to this problem and, basically return everybody back to normalcy. They're not interested in, continuing this conflict. Regardless, the U.S. nor Russia has no interest whatsoever to continue, escalating the conflict. Okay, because there is no, return on that investment, regardless of whatever, whatever weapons deals or whatever, business land deals that they have. I mean, it's really not going to benefit anybody. So I don't think there's going to be much of an appetite for that. With that said, that's pretty much all there is that I wanted to kind of debrief you guys on. So yes, people should pay attention to it. Yes, people should take notes and reflect on what's being said and what's being discussed internally and externally in the news. But the overall situation between Russia and Ukraine, in my opinion, as now the U.S. is going to broker some sort of, conversation, which we should have done back in 2021 to begin with, but the Biden administration did not want to broker, some sort of, peace refereeing type of mechanism. So it basically just escalated to a full-blown war. So, but I think this administration, I think that the Trump administration is still going to look for a deal that is going to make everyone happy. It's not going to be 100%, but at least it's going to make people feel as if they got something out of this, conflict. You know, something positive at least. With that said, thank you for listening to my podcast. My name is Al Mina with the Face Economics podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to our next engagement. Take care. Bye bye.